Good afternoon. Dale here, just coming back for another quick natter. A couple of things I wanted to start the ball rolling with. First of all, I'd like to wish everybody all the very best for 2022. 2021, I think we could all agree, was a pretty torrid year for all of us. But let's hopefully we can move on now to new things and better things. I'd also like to say how very chuffed I am with the recent upsurge in membership in the group. Just in this last couple of weeks or so, we've probably seen 100 or more people join up the last 2 to 3 weeks. It's been really fantastic. And because of that, I thought it's perhaps timely to just come back and in a relatively brief video just recap some of the things I may have covered in the past, but try and keep them a little more condensed. Just starting off with the basics today, and really talking about the second N.Z.E.F Roll of Honour, which is the big roll, as you know. But just before I get on to that, just a little bit of background. The whole purpose of setting up the roll in the first place, and there are other rolls, but the whole purpose in that was to form some sort of digital commemorative record, recognizing the sacrifices that our forebears made when they were overseas fighting to preserve those very freedoms that we enjoy today. So the focus was on World War II, and it was also on those who had served overseas. The group goes a little bit beyond that. You'll see there's a lot of content which I've welcomed with regards family members perhaps who have served here in New Zealand, who also contributed to the war effort. And I think that's a good thing that we're able to recognise that within the group. Unfortunately, it would have been impossible to record any sort of role for these people. I've been 15 years plus at this. I'm just literally working on the second N.Z.E.F role for most of that time, although there has been other work done with the other forces and the extrapolated roles. So it's been a huge undertaking, many thousands of hours of work. So that's just a little bit of a background. It was really to commemorate these men, to recognise the sacrifices that they made, but also to act as some sort of a genealogical record as well. Now this is unique. It is truly unique. We have over 8,200 entries on the roll. And those and the data pertaining to those 8,200 entries is spread over 37 columns. So each separate row, a lot of data on each single row. And I think you're welcome seeing that when you get the opportunity. Now at the end of this video, I will post a link to the website below. And it's from the main page of that website that you will be able to download the roll if you have Excel. As I say, they're an Excel spreadsheet format. Now, all right, so we have this roll. What are we talking about here? Well, first off, we're talking about men and women, soldiers, and war nurses who served overseas during World War II and or who may have served with J-Force immediately post-war. So we're not talking any other wars. That's where our focus is as far as the second N.Z.E.F role goes. Now, so I guess that leads to the next question that's perhaps on your mind is, well, okay, how do you decide who goes on the roll and who doesn't? Now, as I said, we have 8,200 odd entries there now. And so I had to adopt some pretty strict criteria. I widened these. Initially, they were much narrower when we were looking at mainly whangarei. but as we extended out throughout the whole of Northland, that's from North Cape down to Wellsford, it seemed necessary that we also widen out the criteria for inclusion. So anyone who was born in Northland would qualify. Anyone who trained, worked or studied in Northland, likewise. If they lived in Northland even post-war for say more than a year, whether they were in Northland at the time or post-war, they would qualify. Or if they died or were buried or cremated in Northland, again. If they enlisted in Northland, if they had next of kin in Northland, and by next of kin I mean the next of kin as stated on the nominal rolls. We'll talk about those in a minute. If their last known address per the nominal rolls was Northland, likewise they would be included. And if we had a situation where their parents were subsequently found to have lived in Northland at the time they were born, then they were included. Now they may have other, they might have say brothers and sisters who were born before the parents moved to Northland, and no, they would not be included, even though there was a relationship of sorts. They wouldn't meet the criteria, those other criteria that I spoke about. Now, unless of course they lived in Northland themselves. Okay, so the central core of that big roll really has its basis in the nominal rolls, which I started with. Now, those rolls, or you can call them nominal rolls, but they're most commonly known as the nominal rolls, but they are effectively embarkation rolls or deployment rolls. So, for example, the first deployment may have gone over in, say, between January and March 1940. And so there would have been a roll prepared for that deployment and for all subsequent deployments. I think from memory there were about 14 in all. My memory serves me right. And so the information that I have collated has either been directly off the typed copies of those rolls. I imagine the originals were probably handwritten. So they were probably taken off the typed copies, which were available through microfiche at the Auckland Central Library, or off the Ancestry digital record of those same microfiches, or off the N.Z.E.F database, the Auckland Museum N.Z.E.F database, which has only really been completed in recent years. Until about 5 or 6 years ago, really the only people that you were likely to see up there would have been those who had not returned from the war. So they've now done some tremendous work up there to the point where virtually every single soldier and nurse anyway should be up there, everyone that served overseas. And of course there were a lot of others who had served in New Zealand, or those who'd served with other forces such as Air Force and Navy, who are also up there. So I was able to draw on those in latter years, saved me the trip to the library. The problem was that there had been a little bit of lazy reporting, I have to say, where certain things that were available on the nominal rolls didn't end up being put on the Auckland N.Z.E.F database, unfortunately. So now, if you look at those nominal rolls, you will see that for some of the people, there may have been slight changes of name, but more often than not, there was more than one embarkation or deployment. That was not unusual at all. You might have seen 1, 2, 3, even 4 occasionally, 4 deployments throughout the whole of the war period. So there has been a separate entry for each of those embarkations. Just so that you understand that the 8,200 entries, even though it's they're entries, they probably really relate to close to 7,000 odd people who had served, personnel who had served. Now, one of the problems that you have with these entries is that when you come to do research, you find that often the information that's on the nominal roll is not correct at all, or indeed if it was correct, that there were other aliases or nicknames. And so because of that, in addition to the, you'll see that there is a column there that lists known aliases, nicknames, even mismatched names that may not be correct, have been put in there because some of the records otherwise could prove deceptive when people go to look at them. But where a name is widely disparate, okay, so if you had a name like William Brown, for example, but he was also known quite commonly in more recent times perhaps as Wirimu Paraone, then I would have two separate entries, so that if anybody, for example, who only ever knew him as Wirimu Paraone wanted to go in there and find out if he had in fact served, they would see a cross-reference back to William Brown and could see the whole entry, and it would all tie in neatly. And they could find out that yes, he had in fact served, it's just that he served under the name William Brown. And sometimes there may even be more than two entries that I put in. There might have been three or even perhaps four occasionally, where there were three or four, where there were perhaps say up to three other very common aliases used. Okay, now, so that's giving a little bit of an overview of the second N.Z.E.F role. I'm not getting into a breakdown now on the columns that make up that role, or what you're going to see in the columns. I'm going to leave that for another video. And then after I've done that, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the specific entries that are arising out of the likes of genealogical records, because there are certain ways I've recorded things to cover my butt, and I'd like to discuss those a little further, because genealogical records can be notoriously unreliable, and so I will talk about that a little bit more in another video. But I did want to mention, though, that from the second N.Z.E.F role, there have been extrapolated other roles. Now, for each of those deployments, embarkations, I mentioned that each one of those is listed separately on the second N.Z.E.F role, but for each one, for each embarkation, I've set up a separate role, so that you will find, for example, all of the soldiers who appear on the second N.Z.E.F role, who went, say, between January and March 1980, are to be found on the January-March 80 embarkation role as well. So that's just handy to know, because sometimes you do want to know if Uncle Fred went with Dad, if they went across together and ended up in the same unit, or went at the same time, that sort of thing. Another role that's been extrapolated from that is the Lest We Forget role, which focuses solely on those who didn't return, or on a very odd occasion, one or two who did return but died before service was terminated, and they may possibly be buried here in New Zealand. So they could well be on that role. We can talk more about that another time. Another role that's been extrapolated from this is the Maori Battalion role, and it very closely mirrors the entries that you see on the second N.Z.E.F role, but there are a couple of columns which I've deliberately left off. If people were sufficiently interested, they could find the entry on the main role anyway. And of course this one also for the women who were in the New Zealand Army Nursing Service and the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. separate role for them, or separate roles actually for them, but on the one document. Other roles that have been produced, which haven't actually been extrapolated, but they're important nevertheless. Quite recently, the familial roles. Now, that enables you to look at a glimpse at all immediate family members who may have served, irrespective of whether they had the Northland links or not. So the initial entry would be of the person that did have those links, and then on the other side you would see brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, fathers, whatever, but no further out in the relationships. I'm sort of confining to those to immediate family members, and you would find details of those persons listed out. And it's very easy to establish whether that person was regarded as having Northland links or not, the person in the side column, whether they had links to Northland or not. And I've used colour coding to establish those that did and didn't, that did and didn't. There's also a Gallantry Meritorious Awards roll I produced. This is for, this just lists out those people who received gallantry awards during the war, and also those who received other meritorious awards, long service, that type of thing, which would have either pertained to war service. In some instances it may have pertained to service post-war, but also embodied war service. So there is a listing out of those people. And lastly, there is also a prisoner of war list. And again, some of the information that's on that list has come from the second N.Z.E.F roll. Some of it has been obtained from other sources, which we will talk about another time. So that's just, and of course, just in closing, I would mention, yes, there is this other forces roll. I don't know the exact numbers on that right now. I guess it's up over the 2,000, somewhere, something like that, maybe not that many. And that's of our airmen and women and Navy personnel, but they're not really the subject of today's discussion with you. So we will deal with those at some other time. So thank you, look, for taking the time to tune in on this. I hope that's been of some help to you. It gives you a little bit of a picture as to why this role is so important. Next time round, I will give you some information about the columns and just an overview. I won't go into great detail of each of the columns. Hopefully that will be a little bit shorter in this video. And then the last one, which will probably be at least the length of this video, will deal with some of those entries I spoke about where I've had to, where I want to sort of make known to you reasons why I've taken the action that I have taken in the details column, and indeed in one or two other columns on the spreadsheet, such as, for example, aliases. There has been some method to my madness. So thank you once again. I hope you get something out of this, and look forward to talking with you in a few days' time. Bye for now.